The sun was barely visible behind thick gray clouds as the truck rumbled down the quiet highway. The driver, a man in his 40s, had been on the road for hours, his eyes scanning the road carefully. He was used to long drives and the lonely feeling that often came with them, but today something felt different. The wind had picked up, rustling through the trees and causing the leaves to dance across the asphalt. There was an uneasy stillness in the air, a sense that nature was about to do something it had not done before. He adjusted his seat and glanced at the weather app on his phone. A tornado warning had just popped up for the county he was driving through. The alert was urgent, flashing red letters across the screen. He frowned, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. He had seen storms before, storms that made even the bravest drivers nervous. But something about this one felt heavier, more dangerous. It wasn't just the warning on his phone. It was the way the sky seemed to press down, the way the air felt thick and charged. Despite the warning, he knew he had a job to do. His truck was loaded with essential supplies, food, medicine, and other goods that communities depended on. Turning back wasn't an option. The people waiting at the other end of the route needed him. Still, he slowed down, keeping an extra eye on the roads and the other drivers. Most cars were moving cautiously, their drivers squinting through the growing wind and dust. Some had pulled over, perhaps hoping the storm would pass quickly. He understood their caution, but he also knew that for many, waiting could be dangerous. As he drove, he passed a small town on the outskirts of the highway. The streets were almost empty, a few residents running errands or heading home before the weather got worse. He noticed a woman struggling to carry groceries across the street, her umbrella flipping inside out in the gusts. Without thinking, he slowed down and rolled down his window. "Do you need a hand?" he called. The woman nodded, relief washing over her face, and he helped her get her bag safely to the sidewalk. She thanked him quickly, smiling despite the chaos around them. It was a small act, but it made him feel that even in danger, people could still look out for one another. Further down the road, he saw a family standing near their car, looking lost and worried. The father was pointing at the horizon where dark clouds were swirling ominously. The children clung to their mother, their small hands trembling. The truck driver's heart went out to them. He pulled over a little ahead and waited, watching the wind tug at the branches above. When he saw the family approaching, he nodded. "You need a safe place? Get in the truck. I'll take you somewhere out of the storm." They hesitated at first, unsure if it was safe to get into a stranger's vehicle, but the urgency in the sky left them little choice. They climbed into the back of the truck, holding on to each other tightly as the wind howled around them. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, offering a reassuring smile. He didn't speak much, letting his calm presence be the comfort they needed. He adjusted his mirrors and continued down the road, his mind alert for any sign of danger. The clouds were moving faster now, dark and heavy, and the wind had grown stronger. Dust and debris swirled in the air, making it hard to see sometimes. The truck driver kept a steady pace, careful to avoid fallen branches and other hazards. He knew every second counted. One wrong move in this weather could be disastrous, not just for him but for the people in the back of his truck. Every mile felt longer than usual, the storm pressing against him from all sides. Along the way, he saw other people trying to escape the approaching storm. Some were walking quickly with bags in their hands. Others were in cars struggling to keep control as the wind pushed them sideways. He wanted to help them all, but he knew he had to focus on getting the family he already had to safety. His mind raced with thoughts of what could happen if the tornado touched down too close to them. The tension was almost unbearable, but he didn't let it show. His job was to stay calm, to keep everyone safe, and that was exactly what he intended to do. As the town faded behind him, the sky grew darker. The clouds twisted in strange, almost hypnotic patterns, and flashes of lightning illuminated the fields on either side of the highway. The air smelled different now, sharp and heavy, as if the storm itself had a presence that could be felt. He took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. He had faced storms before, but there was something raw and unpredictable about this one. Still, he reminded himself that panicking wouldn't help anyone. His job was simple. Keep moving, keep the people safe, and get through this alive. The family in the back whispered softly to each other, trying to distract themselves from the growing roar outside. He could hear the little boy's shaky voice asking his mother if they would be okay. She held him tightly, whispering back reassurances that sounded fragile even to her own ears. The driver felt a pang in his chest. He didn't know these people, yet he felt responsible for their safety as if they were his own family. That sense of responsibility, that instinct to help, was what had driven him to slow down in the first place. Hours seemed to pass in what was only a few minutes. The road twisted, the storm grew louder, and the truck rattled under the wind. But through it all, the driver's hands remained steady on the wheel. His eyes scanned every inch of the road, and his mind calculated every possible hazard. He had no illusions about the danger. They could be in serious trouble at any moment, but he refused to let fear take over. In the back, the family clung to the sides of the truck, their faces pale but trusting. Somewhere in that chaos, the driver caught sight of a figure running toward the road from a distance. It was another person seeking safety, waving their arms frantically. Without hesitation, he slowed the truck again and opened the door, ready to offer help. He didn't know who this person was, and he didn't care. At that moment, all that mattered was keeping them safe, just like he had done for the others. It was instinct, a simple human choice in the face of danger. As the storm clouds churned above and the wind screamed past, the truck continued down the highway. It was more than just a vehicle moving through a storm. It was a lifeline, a small sanctuary in the middle of chaos. The driver knew that what he was doing mattered, even if no one else would ever know. He didn't do it for recognition or fame. He did it because it was the right thing to do. And in the growing darkness, with danger all around, that simple commitment to helping others was the thing that kept him moving forward. The wind was getting stronger, shaking the truck as it moved down the highway. Dust and debris flew past in thick clouds, making it hard to see even a few feet ahead. The storm was no longer just a warning on the phone. It had arrived in full force. The sky was a deep, angry gray with flashes of lightning and the low, menacing roar of the tornado somewhere in the distance. The driver could feel the truck vibrating under his hands, the powerful gusts pushing against the tires. Every instinct told him to stay calm and focus. Panic could be deadly, and he knew the people in the back of the truck were looking to him for safety. As he drove, he saw the first signs of destruction. Trees were bent at impossible angles. Some snapped in half and scattered across the road. Signs had been ripped from their posts and tumbled into ditches. A few cars had slid off the pavement, their drivers stranded and frightened. He slowed the truck, scanning the surroundings carefully. There was no time to be careless. Every second mattered. The family in the back held each other tightly, eyes wide as the storm raged around them. The driver spoke softly, his calm voice cutting through the roar. "We're going to get through this. Stay close and hold on." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the side of the road. The driver slammed on the brakes and turned his head just in time to see a large tree fall across the road behind him. Dust and splinters filled the air, and the sound of cracking wood seemed to shake the very ground. The driver's heart pounded, but he didn't panic. He quickly assessed the situation and decided to move forward, leaving the fallen tree behind but carefully navigating around smaller debris. The storm wasn't just dangerous, it was unpredictable. It could change course in seconds, and he had to stay ready for anything. Further down the road, he noticed a small group of people huddled near an abandoned gas station. They looked terrified, some clutching children, others holding whatever they could grab for protection. The driver didn't hesitate. He pulled the truck over and got out, letting the door slam against the wind. "Come on, get in the truck. You'll be safer with us," he shouted, his voice steady despite the chaos. The people hesitated at first, fear making them unsure if they could trust a stranger. But the urgency in his tone and the protective look on his face convinced them. One by one, they climbed into the back, grateful for the safety he offered. The driver knew there was no time to waste. The tornado was moving closer, its roar growing louder. He climbed back into the cab and adjusted his mirrors to make sure everyone was secure. The children in the back were crying softly, but the adults were trying to stay calm, whispering reassurances to each other. He gave the truck a firm press on the accelerator, moving steadily down the road. The storm was relentless, shaking the truck and rattling its load, but he kept control, navigating each obstacle with precision. Every turn, every bump in the road was a test of skill and courage. At one point, a strong gust of wind nearly pushed the truck into a ditch. The driver's hands gripped the wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he fought to keep the vehicle steady. The storm was violent, powerful, and unforgiving, but he refused to give in to fear. He thought about the people in the back, their lives in his hands, and it strengthened his resolve. He wasn't just driving a truck, he was carrying hope, safety, and survival through a world gone chaotic. The people he had rescued were beginning to settle down a little, realizing that despite the terrifying conditions, they were not alone. The driver's calm presence was a source of reassurance even though he didn't say much. He had learned that sometimes words weren't enough. Action spoke louder. Every careful maneuver, every thoughtful decision was proof of his commitment to keeping them safe. It was exhausting work, both physically and mentally, but he didn't show it. In moments like these, there was no room for fatigue, only focus and determination. As the tornado drew closer, he noticed more people struggling to reach safety. A woman was dragging a heavy suitcase across a flooded section of road, and a man was trying to shield his children from flying debris. The driver didn't hesitate. He stopped the truck again and shouted, "Get in, hurry!" With quick, efficient movements, he helped them into the back, securing them as best he could. The group was growing and the space was tight, but safety mattered more than comfort. Each life he saved was worth the effort, and he didn't question his choices. The wind was so strong now that it felt like the truck itself might lift off the road. Rain lashed against the windshield and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Lightning flashed nearby, illuminating the terrified faces in the back. The driver's heart raced, but his mind was clear. He focused on the road, on the small gaps between debris, on every detail that could keep them alive. It was a delicate balance, a test of nerve and skill. One wrong move could have been fatal, but he refused to let that happen. In the back, the family he had first picked up was holding each other tightly. The little boy was clinging to his mother, shivering not just from the cold but from fear. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror and offered a reassuring nod. He didn't need to speak. The look alone told them he was in control. He didn't know these people, but he felt responsible for them, a duty stronger than anything else in that moment. It was a human connection born out of crisis, simple and unspoken yet powerful. Somewhere in the storm, he noticed another figure struggling to reach the road, a man waving frantically, trying to signal for help. Without thinking, he slowed the truck and opened the door, braving the wind and rain to guide the man safely inside. The man was soaked, his clothes torn from branches, but relief shone in his eyes. He didn't ask questions, didn't explain who he was. None of that mattered. In the middle of chaos, survival and safety were all that counted. The driver gave a firm nod and closed the door, letting the man settle in with the others. The tornado's roar was deafening now, a constant, low rumble that seemed to shake the earth itself. The truck rattled under the force of the wind, but the driver remained steady. He knew that if he panicked, everyone would panic. His calm was contagious, a silent reassurance that even in the worst storm, there was someone in control. The children in the back were starting to quiet down, trusting him without even realizing it. The adults whispered to each other, sharing their gratitude silently, knowing that words could not fully express what this man's courage meant. Every mile felt longer than the last. The storm showed no mercy, throwing obstacles in their path and testing their limits. Fallen branches, flooded roads, and strong gusts made progress slow and difficult. But the driver never wavered. He moved steadily, carefully, always watching for danger. The people in the back held on, tired and frightened, yet safe for now. They didn't know his name, and he didn't ask theirs. In that moment, they were all just humans helping each other survive a world gone wild. Finally, after what felt like hours, the storm seemed to lessen slightly. The wind was still strong and the sky was dark, but the immediate danger of the tornado appeared to have passed. The driver let out a quiet sigh of relief, his hands still gripping the wheel, his eyes scanning the road ahead. He knew the hardest part wasn't over. There could still be hidden dangers, but for now they were alive. That was what mattered most. He glanced at the people in the back. Their faces were wet, tired, and pale, but there was a spark of hope. They had survived the worst together, guided by someone who didn't know them but had risked everything for their safety. In that moment, the driver felt a quiet pride not in himself, but in the simple act of helping others when it mattered most. The storm had tested them, but it had also shown the strength of human compassion. The storm was beginning to move away, but its power had not fully faded. The truck rattled over broken branches and small pieces of debris scattered across the highway. The driver's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was still alert, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The air smelled of wet earth, leaves, and something sharp that came after strong winds. It was a smell that reminded him of storms past, but this one had felt different, wilder, more unpredictable. The people in the back were starting to settle down a little, although their faces still carried traces of fear. Children clutched blankets tightly, their wide eyes darting nervously toward every movement outside. Adults whispered softly to comfort them, trying to calm the shaking voices of the little ones. The driver didn't speak much, but his presence alone was comforting. He had learned that sometimes, in moments of crisis, people needed action more than words. His calm determination was a silent reassurance, a promise that they would get through this together. As he drove, he noticed more people stranded along the road. Some were clinging to the remains of fences or holding onto cars that had skidded into ditches. One elderly woman was trying to steady herself on the wet pavement, her cane slipping in the mud. Without hesitation, the driver slowed down and rolled down his window. "Come on, get in. You'll be safer with us," he shouted over the roar of the wind. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if it was safe. But the urgency in his voice and the visible effort he had already made to help others convinced her. She moved carefully toward the truck, grateful for the help that had appeared when she needed it most. The driver helped her climb inside, making sure she was seated safely among the others. He didn't ask for thanks, nor did he expect it. To him, it was simply the right thing to do. Around him, the storm still raged, but he refused to let it control him. Every life he saved was more important than the fear pressing against him. Every person in the back of the truck was a responsibility he carried silently, a duty stronger than any storm. The children had started asking questions, their voices soft and curious despite the fear. "Are we going to be okay?" one little voice asked. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror and gave a reassuring nod. "We're going to be okay," he said simply. It wasn't a promise that the storm would do no harm, but it was a promise that he would do everything in his power to keep them safe. The children seemed to understand, trusting him without knowing why. It was that quiet human connection that gave him strength to keep moving forward. The tornado was moving farther away, but the damage it had left behind was evident. Houses with roofs torn open, fences scattered like toothpicks, and trees uprooted from the ground. The driver's heart ached as he passed each scene of destruction. He didn't know the people who lived in these homes, but he could imagine their fear, their shock at seeing their world turned upside down in an instant. He kept driving, silently vowing that he would continue to help as long as anyone needed him. At one point, he noticed a man trying to guide a car out of a ditch. The man's coat was soaked and his hat had blown off in the storm. The driver slowed down and called to him, offering help. The man looked surprised but nodded quickly, realizing that the truck was a lifeline in the chaos. The driver guided him to the back, helping him climb in safely. He didn't ask questions about who the man was or why he had been out in the storm. It didn't matter. In this moment, names, titles, and social status were meaningless. What mattered was survival, and he was determined to provide it. Inside the truck, the growing group of people huddled together for warmth and comfort. Some held hands, others whispered quietly to calm frightened children. The driver's eyes caught a man at the back, checking a phone as if trying to get updates on the tornado's path. There was something different about him, a calm confidence, a presence that seemed out of place among the terrified crowd. The driver didn't know it yet, but this man was important. A U.S. senator traveling quietly, trying to avoid attention. But at that moment, he was just another person in need, and the driver treated him no differently than anyone else. The wind gusted again, stronger this time, shaking the truck violently. Rain pounded against the roof and windows, making it hard to see even a few feet ahead. The driver's focus never wavered. His experience on the road had taught him to remain calm, to trust his instincts, and to keep moving even when the path seemed impossible. He navigated around fallen signs, puddles that hid debris, and other hazards, each movement precise and calculated. The passengers in the back clung to the seats and each other, but their trust in him remained unwavering. At one point, a small group of children looked out the windows, wide-eyed and curious despite the fear. "Is it going to get worse?" one asked quietly. The driver gave them a gentle nod. "It's calming down now. We're getting through it," he replied. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had faced danger many times and knew how to stay composed. The children leaned back, feeling the security of the truck and the calm authority of the man driving it. Hours seemed to pass in what could only have been a few minutes. The storm's fury was still present, but it was no longer overwhelming. The roar of the tornado was fading into the distance, replaced by the occasional crack of falling branches and the soft patter of rain on the metal roof. The driver kept going, eyes never leaving the road, knowing that even a moment of distraction could have consequences. Every life in the back depended on his focus, and he refused to let them down. The group in the back began to whisper among themselves, sharing small comforts and trying to lighten the heavy mood. Some shared water or blankets, others offered quiet words of encouragement. The driver noticed how humans naturally tried to help each other even in the midst of chaos. It reminded him why he did what he did. Not for recognition, not for fame, but because he couldn't imagine turning away when someone needed help. It was instinct, and it was human. As they continued, the driver noticed another figure struggling to reach the road, a woman holding a small child in her arms, her clothes soaked and torn from the storm. Without hesitation, he slowed the truck and opened the door, braving the wind to guide them safely inside. The woman's face was etched with fear and relief, and she whispered her thanks, though the driver simply nodded. Words were unnecessary. Actions mattered more. He helped them settle in, making sure the child was secure and the mother had a firm grip on the blanket he handed them. By now, the truck was crowded, filled with people who had been rescued from the storm. Each one had a story, each one a reason they were on that road at that particular time. The driver didn't know their stories, and he didn't need to. In the middle of disaster, every person was equal, every life precious. His task was clear: get them through this safely. Nothing else mattered. Finally, the storm seemed to lessen even more. The rain was lighter, and the wind, though still strong, no longer threatened to toss the truck off the road. The driver allowed himself a brief moment to glance around. The people in the back were tired, wet, and shaken, but alive. The children leaned against their parents, exhausted but slowly calming. The adults exchanged quiet words, sharing relief and gratitude without needing to speak directly to him. He smiled faintly, not for recognition, but for the simple fact that they had survived together. In the midst of the chaos, the U.S. Senator, still unnoticed by the driver, leaned back against the seat and observed the scene silently. He had expected storms before, but he had not expected to find himself relying on a stranger for safety. The driver didn't know who he was, and he treated him like everyone else, with care, attention, and respect. That was the essence of his character. He didn't see status or titles, only human beings in need. The driver's mind was alert, thinking ahead to the next mile, the next hazard, the next life that might need his help. He didn't stop, didn't slow his determination, because he knew that as long as the storm had not fully passed, his work was not done. Every movement, every decision was part of a larger effort to save as many people as he could. The storm had tested them all, but he refused to let it break their spirit. The storm had passed, but its power was still visible everywhere. Trees lay snapped across roads, roofs were missing from houses, and debris littered the fields and streets. The air was heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth and broken wood. It was quiet now, almost eerily so, as if the world itself was taking a breath after the chaos. The truck driver slowed his vehicle, scanning the road ahead. Even though the immediate danger had passed, there was still work to do, and he knew he couldn't relax just yet. The people in the back were beginning to emerge from their fear. Children peeked out the windows, pointing at the wreckage they had seen along the way. Some of them shivered, not just from the cold, but from the shock of witnessing the storm's force. Parents held their children tightly, whispering reassurances that now sounded more like relief than fear. The driver didn't speak much. His presence alone was enough to calm them, but he did offer small words of comfort. "We're safe now," he said, and though it was simple, the words carried a weight of truth. As the truck moved slowly along the damaged road, they began to see others starting to regroup. Neighbors helped each other lift fallen trees, check on friends, and salvage what they could from broken homes. Emergency vehicles were arriving in the distance, their lights cutting through the gray and wet landscape. The driver watched silently, knowing that the people he had rescued would soon have additional help, but also knowing that the first hours after a disaster were the most dangerous. His responsibility had been to get them through the worst, and he had done just that. Some of the rescued people began to speak quietly among themselves. They shared stories of how they had been caught in the storm, how they had sought shelter, and how the truck driver had appeared just in time. Their words were filled with gratitude, though none dared to speak it directly to him at first. They were overwhelmed by what had happened, trying to process the fear and relief in the same breath. The driver noticed, and he didn't interrupt them. He knew these stories were theirs to share, and that his role was to remain humble and focused. He drove slowly toward a small community center that had opened its doors to anyone displaced by the storm. People were gathering there, some standing in lines for food and water, others seeking medical attention for minor injuries. The driver guided the truck carefully, parking in a safe spot and letting the rescued people step out. They thanked him quietly, some hugging him, others simply offering a nod of appreciation. He returned each gesture with a humble smile, refusing to take the spotlight. For him, the real reward was seeing them safe, alive, and beginning to recover from the chaos they had endured. One by one, the children stepped out, holding their parents' hands tightly. The little boy he had rescued earlier looked up at him and smiled softly, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond formed during the storm. The driver nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with recognition or praise. It was a simple human connection, the kind that only comes when people face fear together and survive. The adults exchanged stories quietly, sharing details about the storm and their struggles, and the driver listened without judgment, knowing that for them, being heard was as important as being safe. The man who had been checking his phone during the storm, the U.S. Senator, though the driver didn't know it yet, stood quietly at the edge of the group. He looked around at the people gathered, noting the small ways in which the community had begun to come together. Even as a figure of influence and power, he felt the same fear and relief as everyone else. He had been saved by a stranger, treated with care and respect, and it reminded him that heroism could come from anywhere, from ordinary people willing to act when the world turned dangerous. Emergency responders approached the truck and the gathered people, offering assistance and checking for injuries. The driver stepped back, letting them take over, knowing that his role in this immediate crisis was complete. He had guided people through the worst of the storm, and now it was time for trained professionals to provide the next layer of help. Still, he remained close, watching to make sure everyone was accounted for and safe. His sense of responsibility didn't end with stopping the truck. It was about ensuring people truly made it to safety. Some of the rescued people began to speak directly to the driver, their voices trembling with gratitude. "We wouldn't have made it without you," one woman said, tears in her eyes. He shook his head gently. "I just did what I had to do," he replied simply. His humility was evident, and the people could see that he didn't seek attention. They nodded, understanding that sometimes heroes don't announce themselves. They act quietly, letting their deeds speak for themselves. The children played quietly nearby, picking up small sticks and stones, exploring the aftermath in a way that was cautious but full of curiosity. Parents watched, grateful that their little ones could feel a sense of normalcy even after such a terrifying event. The driver observed them, feeling a sense of satisfaction that he had contributed to this moment of safety. He didn't need recognition, but there was a quiet pride in knowing that his actions had made a tangible difference in people's lives. Meanwhile, the man who had been quietly observing, still the senator, approached the driver carefully. He didn't introduce himself immediately, simply offering a nod and a quiet, "Thank you." The driver looked back, returning the gesture with a modest smile, unaware of the man's identity. For him, it didn't matter who this person was. He had helped a human being in need, and that was enough. The senator nodded again, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and admiration, realizing that true heroism often comes from ordinary people who act without expectation. As the hours passed, more people arrived at the community center, many walking through the wreckage carrying what they could salvage. The driver helped guide them as best he could, pointing out safer paths and helping lift those struggling with heavy items. His focus remained on others, never on himself. It was clear that he had become a figure of quiet authority and reassurance, someone the people could rely on even when the storm had passed. Volunteers and emergency teams worked tirelessly to distribute supplies, and the driver helped where he could. He handed out water and blankets, offered support to the elderly, and made sure the children were safe. The chaos had calmed, but the need for human care and guidance was still great. The driver's presence, steady and calm, became a small anchor in the midst of rebuilding and recovery. He didn't see himself as extraordinary. He simply saw what needed to be done and did it. By late afternoon, the immediate threat of the storm was gone, leaving only the quiet aftermath. People were settling in, helping one another, and beginning the slow process of picking up the pieces. The driver stood back for a moment, surveying the scene. The fear and tension were slowly giving way to relief and gratitude. Families were together, children were safe, and the people he had rescued were alive. For him, that was the true measure of success. The man who had been quietly observing the senator approached once more, now a little closer. He still didn't reveal his identity, knowing that the driver had no way of knowing who he was. "You saved lives today," he said simply. The driver shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do," he replied. It was modesty, plain and simple. But the senator could see that it was not just words, it was truth. This man had acted without expectation, without concern for recognition, and had made a real difference. As the sun began to break through the clouds, casting a soft light on the wet, damaged landscape, the driver took a deep breath. The storm had tested everyone in its path, but it had also revealed the strength of human compassion. People had come together. Strangers had helped strangers, and courage had been shown in quiet, everyday actions. For the driver, this moment was a quiet victory, not in fame or accolades, but in knowing that he had helped people survive, helped them feel safe, and helped them believe in humanity, even in the face of disaster. The sun had fully emerged now, breaking through the clouds and casting a warm, golden light across the town. The storm was over, but its traces were everywhere. Broken trees, damaged roofs, and scattered debris covered the streets. The air was still heavy with the smell of wet earth and rain, but there was a sense of calm in the town that hadn't been there before. People were emerging from their homes and shelters, cautiously stepping outside to see what had survived and what had been lost. The truck driver stood near his vehicle, watching as the rescued families began to reunite with neighbors and friends. Children ran to each other, laughing nervously, their previous fear still lingering but slowly fading. Adults helped one another lift fallen branches, check on friends, and begin cleaning up what they could. The driver felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not from recognition, but from knowing that his actions had made a difference. Every life he had helped save was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, ordinary people could be extraordinary. The man he had rescued earlier, the one checking his phone during the storm, approached him again. This time he introduced himself, explaining that he was a public official visiting the area. The driver listened politely, nodding and smiling modestly, but he didn't make a big deal of it. To him, the man's position didn't matter. What mattered was that he had been able to help someone in need. The senator expressed his gratitude sincerely, shaking the driver's hand and looking him in the eye. "You risked your life today to help strangers," he said. "That is courage and compassion in its purest form." The driver shrugged, still modest. "I just did what anyone should do," he replied. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a man who truly believed in helping others without expectation. Around them, the people he had rescued watched quietly, their faces reflecting relief and admiration. They had survived the storm because of his quick thinking, bravery, and calm demeanor, and now they were safe and beginning to recover. As the morning progressed, news crews began arriving, capturing the aftermath of the tornado and interviewing those affected. The driver stayed in the background, refusing interviews at first, preferring to remain quiet. But soon the people he had helped insisted that he be recognized. They spoke of his courage, his quick decisions, and the way he had kept everyone calm during the storm. They shared stories of how he had rescued children, helped the elderly, and brought strangers together safely. The driver listened silently, letting their words speak louder than any headline could. The senator stepped forward during one of the interviews, publicly praising the truck driver. He spoke of how one man's quick thinking and bravery had saved lives, emphasizing that heroism often comes from ordinary people willing to do what is right without seeking fame. The driver still stood quietly to the side, humbled by the recognition. He didn't seek praise, but he allowed the acknowledgement to shine, not for himself, but for the message it sent, that courage and kindness matter, even when no one is watching. Throughout the day, the community began organizing themselves. Volunteers distributed food and water, emergency crews assessed damage, and neighbors helped neighbors rebuild. The driver assisted where he could, lifting supplies, guiding people to safer areas, and providing small comforts to those still shaken by the storm. Though the worst was over, the aftermath required patience, effort, and care, and he remained present, quietly contributing in every way he could. The children he had rescued earlier ran to him, holding small gifts they had made from paper and leaves. "Thank you," they said simply, their voices soft but sincere. He knelt down, accepting their tokens with a warm smile. "You're welcome," he replied. It was a simple exchange, but it captured everything the day had been about: human connection, gratitude, and the understanding that one person's actions could make a real difference. The senator returned briefly to express his gratitude again, emphasizing that the driver's actions were a reminder to everyone of what mattered most in life: compassion, courage, and selflessness. Even as a public figure, he admitted that he had never witnessed such quiet, effective heroism before. The driver nodded humbly, looking around at the people who had survived, knowing that this moment of recognition was not just for him, but for every ordinary person willing to act in extraordinary circumstances. By afternoon, the emergency response teams had begun their formal work. Shelters were being organized, medical aid was being provided, and local authorities were documenting damage for recovery efforts. The driver helped guide people toward the temporary shelters, making sure families and children were settled safely. Even though he had already done so much, he refused to step away until he knew everyone was accounted for. His sense of responsibility extended beyond the immediate danger. It was about ensuring the safety and well-being of those he had helped. People continued to approach him throughout the day, expressing gratitude in small ways. Some offered snacks or drinks, others shared hugs, and a few simply nodded with tears in their eyes. He accepted each gesture quietly, still modest, still humble. He didn't need recognition to know he had done the right thing. The true reward was seeing the community slowly coming back together, seeing children laugh again, and knowing that fear had been replaced by hope. As evening approached, the town began to quiet down. The storm was behind them, but the recovery had just begun. The driver walked slowly to his truck, taking a final look at the people he had helped. They were talking, laughing nervously, and beginning to rebuild. It was a small victory in a larger struggle, but it was meaningful. The senator approached one last time, offering a firm handshake and sincere thanks. The driver smiled, nodding. He knew that he had played a small but crucial part in helping people survive and find hope in the aftermath. He climbed into his truck, preparing to continue his journey. The road ahead was long, and life on the highway would continue as always. Yet he felt a quiet sense of pride and fulfillment, not because of the recognition or praise, but because he had done what was right. He had helped strangers when they needed him most, and in doing so, had shown the true meaning of courage and humanity. As he drove away, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow across the town. The tornado was only a memory now, a